morning to everybody. Alexis Harrison here with CT 169 Strong. We're continuing our conversation on the zoning bills that Hartford, our lawmakers, are considering right now. We've seen a lot of onerous bills come our way, and we need to discuss them and educate the public. So this morning we have Senator Ryan Fazio, who represents the 36th district, Greenwich, Stamford, and New Canaan. He also is the ranking member of the Planning and Development Committee in Hartford, which will ultimately, decide and be part of that process of decision making on some of these bills. We have Matt Mandell, who's on the Westport RTM, and he also is the chairman of their P&Z subcommittee. We have Scott Hobbs from the New Canaan Housing Authority. Great to see you. Kathryn Braun, who's a member of CT 169 Strong, an environmental attorney, and also is on the Fairfield Town Planning and Zoning Commission with me. And last but not least, we have Maria Weingarten, member of the New Canaan Board of Finance and founder of CT 169 Strong. Thanks for joining us this morning, guys. Really appreciate it. I'm going to kick it off to Senator Fazio. Maybe you can give us a lay of the land of what's going on in Hartford right now. I know there was a public hearing yesterday where some of us testified on a number of TOD bills. So perhaps you can just start there and give us a summary.
Well, thanks again for having me, Alexis. And I am just a great admirer of all the work that CT 169 Strong is doing. It is really punching above its weight, and that's putting it lightly, because you're fighting against well-funded activists, obviously funded by groups that have development interests. And that doesn't mean that some of the people in those groups are not well-meaning, but it's very one-sided and very ideological. And there really was nothing prepared to go against that sort of onslaught of effort to take away so much more local control from our towns and cities. And 169 Strong really stepped into that void and has really made a difference in the minds of policymakers and in the minds of the public in order to understand the unfairness of a lot of these proposals to our towns and cities who want to be able to govern themselves. And so I think a lot of us are very thankful for the efforts of 169 Strong. Right now is early in the legislative session, but it's a very important time in the legislative session. For context, the legislative session every year normally lasts from January through May or June, so roughly the first half of the year. And early in the legislative session, we're going through the committee process. So in January, legislators proposed probably a couple thousand bills in the aggregate. And those bills then are sent to committees of cognizance. And the two committees of cognizance related to development and housing and zoning are planning and development, where I'm the ranking member, which means that I'm the lead Republican Senate member, and the housing committee. And those committees decide whether or not to give a public hearing to those bills, and then draft those bills into full legal language, statutory language, and then whether or not that they pass through the committee to go to the full floor of the House or the Senate. And so right now we've had public hearings or are having public hearings for many of the bills that are in question for this discussion. Again, some of those bills are very bad. Some of those bills are good. I mean, that might be a little biased because some of them I proposed, but the ones that stand a greater chance of passing, unfortunately, are the bad bills because of the simple arithmetic of the balance of the state legislature and the leadership of the state legislature, especially in the House and Senate, especially a couple people in the House and Senate really do want to see more state imposition on towns and cities over zoning. And so a few of the bills that either have gone through a public hearing or will go through a public hearing and are being drafted and are eventually going to be voted up or down by the committees in all likelihood, one way or the other, which is where this group is so important and the people in attendance are so important, is the Fair Share Act, which is probably the worst, in my opinion, of all the bills, 6633. It's a House bill, and it would probably constitute the second or third biggest unfunded mandate on local taxpayers in the history of this state. probably amounting to $20,000 per the average person in this city, in the state, which basically puts localities on the hook for building thousands of units in even in a city like Stamford, thousands of units in a place like Greenwich, and 1,000 or 2,000 units in a place like New Canaan, just for example. If not, then it basically totally vanquishes local zoning. There's there's a housing authority bill which allows housing authorities from different towns and cities to go in and act in a different town or city, which is a rather strange concept because it is essentially a governmental entity of one municipality, a quasi-governmental agency. There is a work, live, ride bill and a transit-oriented development bill in front of my committee, planning and development. Those are on the housing committee. Some of the worst bills, I think, are on the housing committee rather than planning and development. And then there's transit-oriented development bills, which basically seek to take away local zoning from any area radius within a half mile or a mile of a transit station, so a bus station or a train station. Again, there are many bad bills. Those are just a few highlights. There are many bad bills that will take away a lot of local input from the process. We want to build affordable housing. We want to build housing, but we want to do it with local input and local jurisdiction. And so that's the fight we're fighting. And 169 Strong has been absolutely instrumental in that fight.
Really appreciate you going through all those. And, to the audience, please go to ct169strong.org. We also have, breakdowns of the bills too. I want to go to Matt Mandell. Matt, I know that you've been very, vocal against transit-oriented development in your community. And I think most of us favor TOD, but it has to be done right. It has to be done with the voice of the people. As of right is never a good thing. So maybe you can, talk about how this will impact the Westport community.
Well, it's not just the Westport community, but any of the communities that have it, because most of them were put together not with the idea that there was going to be 3 to 4 times the number of people in that general vicinity. And the basis for the transit-oriented development is to create these nice walkable communities that don't have cars. The point is that the communities weren't built for that. So the idea of suddenly putting in 20 units per acre as of right, and what you're talking about as of right, meaning that they don't have to go to the planning and zoning commissions to get approval. It's like, okay, I own an acre and I can build 20 units. And the next thing you know, you've got hundreds and hundreds of units there, and saying, okay, that they have to limit the amount of parking there is. And it's like, wait a second, where's the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker? Where are the places that these people are going to go to be able to survive? You're going to go shopping. The shopping is 4 miles away on the post road in Westport's case. So they need to be able to drive. So if you limit the parking and they don't know where to park and you can't park on the street because it isn't there, now you're creating this sort of 2-class system. Those are the people who have cars that can go around and do things, and those other people that are stuck right in that area and not being able to live a fruitful and full life. So it's very strange that they want to go and do this. Now, Desegregate Connecticut has been going around to the different communities trying to pitch their plan. They came to Westport about a week and a half ago, and after they left, they looked like a bunch of deer in the headlights, because we really laid it on them explaining what the problems were. I mean, first of all, as of right doesn't work. You can't just come in and wipe out the ability for a town to say, this is the right place to do it, this isn't the right place to do it. In Westport's case, we've been building huge amounts of affordable housing and working for it for years, and we're not really getting the credit, politically for doing that. But so you come in, you can't have as of right, it just doesn't work. You can't have a lower parking standard because you need to still have cars, because the communities were built for that. The biggest bugaboo that there is with the Live, Work, Ride and some of these other TOD plans is that the affordable housing doesn't kick in until you have 10 units. So this is the greatest gift to developers I could ever imagine, is the as of right ability to come into Westport, Connecticut, near its train station, where there are single acre lots, and say, I'm going to come in and I'm going to build 9 units. And then the next guy over is going to buy another acre and build another 9 units and another 9 units. And these units are going to sell for $2 and $3 million. Not one of them will be affordable. And what will happen is the developers will come in there, they'll build, they'll cut and run and leave. And now we're going to be sitting there with hundreds of units of $1 million homes None are affordable, and none of their concepts will ever get done. It's ridiculous. And you go one step further, the environmental impact. They're not looking at what's going on along the coastline. You got Metro North running up and along down, along, Darien up to New Canaan, up to New Haven, through Westport, Fairfield. The statistics show, and it's even on the state's own website, that the Westport train station could well be underwater within 20 years and inaccessible. Is this really the place where we're supposed to be densifying? Are we really supposed to be going up along the coast and building all this housing here? Someone's not thinking here. We need to be looking at the future. Maybe we're supposed to be densifying along the 84 corridor instead, and thinking about how are we supposed to be gracefully removing ourselves from the coastline, because what will happen is the mobile people have the money and they're all going to leave. If we build all this, and if there is any affordable housing, the people that don't have the money and are immobile will be stuck. The developers will build, the developers will make their money and leave, and everybody who can't afford to move will be there. Who gets stuck? Those people get stuck, and who gets stuck with the bill? The state gets stuck with the bill. They're not thinking globally. They're not thinking about the long-term effects of anything that they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And I was actually rereading your testimony from, I think, 2 years back, and you talked about, climate change, and that's been largely devoid of the conversation. So I'm really glad that, you keep bringing that up. I want to turn this conversation over to 830G. I know that's kind of always kind of the devil in the room, if you will. And I want to talk to Kathryn Braun and Scott Hobbs about that. And I think most people in the audience knows that 830G was enacted, over 30 years ago, and it largely, enables housing developers to bypass zoning rules that we have to adhere to, as long as they deed restrict 30% of their units affordable. And I think most of us, I know I'm on the zoning commission, Kathy, we sit on the zoning commission together. We struggle with this bill or with this law, but we have to adhere to it. It is law. And it's something that we do have to follow. Can you talk about how we got to this 10% target that every town has to have? I think a lot of people don't understand it. I know a lot of people have been asking us about that.
Well, technically, it's not a target.
Okay.
It's an exemption amount. When this law was passed over 30 years ago, it was I met with someone in Hartford that helped craft the bill. It was sort of arbitrary, basically, to omit the cities and the poorer communities that already had large housing projects that had been funded by the state over the years, over the decades. It was to exempt them from the sort of onerous, burdensome reach of the bill. So 10% was picked. Anybody who doesn't have 10% is subject to the bill. Any town who has 10% is not subject to the bill. So you can go into our larger cities, and basically 31 towns or cities in Connecticut have had 10% for the last 20 or 30 years, and 31% still have 10% now. So 10% could be seen as a goal of the state because that is the exempt amount. So even though nobody says that this is the target, that is what everybody considers it as a target. It simply means if you don't have it, you're subject to the bill. If you do have it, you're not. And why it matters is if you're subject to the bill, you basically, even though public hearings are allowed, it's not strictly as of right. When we find this sitting on the zoning commission, our hands are tied behind our back. It basically mostly eviscerates zoning regulations for applications that are filed under 8-30G. 30% of the units have to be at affordable rental rates or sale rates with deed restrictions. So if those qualifications are met, any developer can build anything they want, wherever they want in your town, right next door to you. They can sell their little house in a quarter-acre lot and put up a high-rise apartment building with no respect to setbacks, coverage, parking, or anything else. The only way a town can basically deny that is if there's evidence in the record, and usually that requires people hiring lawyers and experts, which a lot of more modest neighborhoods simply can't do. Evidence has to be in the record to support a commission's decision to deny. The burden then shifts to the commission to justify a denial in court. That is the opposite of the way every other administrative hearing works. There might be one other area of law, I can't identify it now, but basically administrative law works. If you lose your application at a public hearing, the burden's on you to prove the commission asked very arbitrarily and totally abused their discretion. This reverses it. And that burden shifting is the main way this law is enforced. And unfortunately, when it goes to the courts, the judges are cognizant of this 10% ratio. Towns can fluctuate up and down towards 10% or down away from it based on how that ratio is calculated. There are things outside of town's control, such as the use by individuals of Section 8 housing vouchers in your town, or the use by individuals of CHAFA down payment assistance in your town. If individuals use them less this year than last year, your ratio could go down. Also, another sort of fallacy of the 10% is, as I mentioned, when the law was created, the poor communities or the larger cities already had 10% because massive investment in large public housing projects had taken place over the prior decades. Other towns don't. So if you already had 20,000 units and only maybe 1% were affordable back 30 years ago, you're never going to get to 10%. It's an unachievable goal, if you will. And therefore, what it means is towns that didn't have it are probably never going to get it, which means you're always going to be stuck with this burden shifting draconian reach of 8-30G. And we are bound by it. But it's disappointing because there are local issues that should dictate what we do. In my town, we're elected. We are elected to take the best interests of our community into light in every decision we make. And that means looking at the local issues. Where is the open space needed? Where are the wildlife corridors? Where are historic resources? A lot of times these things are, we really can't do what we should be doing to take care of our community.
Yeah. Thanks, Kathy.
Alexis, may I interject on that?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So I sat on the subcommittee of Future and Development on the Affordable Housing Committee, and that 10% was a big discussion because in many of the 8-30J reports or plans that came out of the towns, people mentioned the 10% target or 10% goal. And it became a fight in the committee discussing whether or not it is a goal or not. And the state DOH, the Department of Housing, and people who are advocates of affordable housing are saying 10% is not a goal because the need for affordable housing is probably greater than the 10% depending upon the particular community. So the idea of saying it's a goal, they don't want it to be a goal. And I believe the reason being is that it's going to become a moving target, that 10% is going to shift to 12% or 15% moving forward. I think that's really what's occurring. So yes, obviously, I think it's a goal because it shuts off 830G. Does it actually catch the need for affordable housing? It may not. But the point is that I think that's going to be a moving target coming, in the future.
Yeah, great point. And I do want to note that I know Senator Fazio, you are working to trying to make modifications to 830G and really appreciate your work there. I do want to note that if we can go to Scott, I know you've been doing incredible work in New Canaan. Maybe you can talk about the affordable housing that you've been building in New Canaan and also talk about the economics of building. I think most of us don't know how much it costs to build units. And if you could just give us, a tutorial on that, that would be great.
Sure. So in New Canaan, we over the last 15 years or so, we've gone ahead and taken a total of 100 really outdated units that did not qualify as affordable housing under any modern standard. We've totally rejuvenated those 100 units, and we've added an additional 113 units. And it's been a very long process. It's very laborious in order to try to abide by the rules, go with, we have to work with, you get tagged by HUD, you get tagged by CHAFA, you have all of these rules and regulations that just really increase the costs of even trying to create affordable housing. When I go in and sign, I used to have a rule that, I'd never read something I didn't sign. And then I got presented with the development papers for Millport, the Millport project in New Canaan. And I think they built the Freedom Tower with less paperwork. I mean, literally you have a 30-foot long table with 6 original copies of stuff inside of folders that goes down the whole thing. It's 4 hours worth of just signing paperwork in order to do I guess that was probably a $20 million project. And we've done 4 other versions of those. And so it's unbelievable, the paperwork. Then you have to abide by all the rules and regulations, which makes it much more expensive to build than if you're just doing private development. The state does provide some dollars, but whenever they provide dollars, and I should say it's almost national, you have 4% tax credits that provide essentially a lot of equity that can go into a project. But even with those tax credits, you still have to come up with a lot of money up front in order to make the deal viable. And then if you are using any public funds, you also get tagged with prevailing wage, which means that you end up paying 10 to 20% more for the labor costs, which then get recycled back to the politicians and donations, which they then end up allocating more tax dollars for more tax credits that then go to the unions that then go back to the politicians. So it's very expensive to create the housing. And then once you actually create the housing, renting affordable units, because all of this talk about affordable with 830G, it is legally deeded affordable under the rules of the state. That doesn't mean it's really necessarily affordable or not affordable, and it ignores a whole lot of other stuff. It's only if it's legally deeded. And under those, and in order to comply with those rules, it costs more to process a tenant. It takes a lot longer, which means it creates more vacancy inside of the system. And it's just very expensive. So in creating units in Fairfield County, you're probably in the neighborhood of $400,000 to $500,000 per unit before land. And land ends up being a real variable cost. I mean, it's really expensive in a lot of places inside of Fairfield County, especially in a development place where it would be natural to put in a big housing development. So all of these economics push development toward much bigger developments, because under 830G, you have to get 100. New Canaan has to get like 152 points. Let's get rid of the whole point system. That depends upon how you actually, what type of affordable housing you create. But roughly, you got to create 70 units every 4 years to get a moratorium. 70 units. And if you've been to New Canaan and you've seen our Millport development or Canaan Parish, or there's a private development called The View, those are about 100 units. And that means we got to do something around that size every 4 years. And given all of the paperwork that's involved and all of the fixed cost with trying to do an affordable project, you have to do a lot of units to have it make sense. Doing like 8 or 9 or 10 unit developments, it eats up a lot of bandwidth, a lot of dollars, and the per unit cost goes very expensive. So it pushes toward doing very big developments, which don't tend, I mean, you look back at the Norman Rockwell paintings and stuff, and New England towns don't have 100-unit developments. And that's really what they're pushing us to do.
In New Canaan, is it even feasible to do that every 4 years? I mean, do you have the land? Do you have the infrastructure?
I think I'd done the math in order, because I remember also that we're now going to rent for lower than market value.
Right.
And because of, again, the expense of the land and the difficulty in doing the projects, you can't really even do mixed use. Mixed income. You've got to really go for all 100% affordable, which means you need even more seed money. So I think I'd done the calculation, and I think New Canaan's got to put in somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $100 million over the next 20 years for us to get to the point of actually being 10% affordable. And at that point, New Canaan's grown by about 50%, which if you've driven the roads, if you've gone to the parking lots, if you've tried to see the schools, you've destroyed New Canaan. So is it feasible? Everything's feasible. Is it advisable? No, absolutely not.
Right. Thank you. Maria, I want to go to you because I know you've been really studying the fair share bill, and we've had a lot of discussion on this. And I think Senator Fazio said, fair share is essentially a vote to raise our property taxes. And I know you've done a lot of math and spreadsheets. Let's go to the fair share bill, which is another bill coming from the legislator from the Housing Committee, and that was voted out of committee last week. And so that's being advanced, and perhaps it could get to the floor for a vote. But again, we're not privy to all the sausage making, but perhaps Marie, you could touch on that, because fair share would be in addition to 830G.
Correct. And so we have a spreadsheet that's on our website on ct169strong.org. And that shows where all the towns are. We've taken the data that's available to anybody who wants to take a look. And we have the links provided as well, where you can look to see your 830G calculation, how you might reach that, or what percentage, what the mix of your town is in the different categories to get to a 10%. And then we also took the fair share number from the Open Communities Alliance. So we went through this at our last Zoom discussion, but I'll talk about New Canaan for a second. We did Fairfield last time, so we'll talk about New Canaan this time. So New Canaan has about 7,551 units. That's as of 2022. And So in the calculation that was done by Open Communities Alliance, they're looking for New Canaan to build 1,350 units of affordable housing. And they are very prescriptive in the bill. And in the bill, it shows that you need to have deeply affordable, very, very low. So 30% level at the 50% level of the average median. And then at the, I believe 60%. So 30, 50, and maybe 80% is the third category. So you're going to have to create every town within 10 years, you'd have to create your 1,350 units. If you decide to ignore the policy, the zoning advocates and the developers have standing to sue towns and for performance and also to collect damages. And this has happened in New Jersey, which is the only other state that has a fair share plan since 1975, when there was a litigation, a suit that caused this to come about, the Mount Laurel doctrine. And so so you have to build your shares. If you choose to ignore it, you can get sued, but in addition, it automatically defaults to default zoning is what they're calling it within the bill. And it says that anywhere where there's town water, town sewer, you can build up to 20 units an acre as of right. And then anywhere that isn't on town sewer and town water, it's as much as your area septic and your area well can handle. And there are, really significant grave implications to any community. I know we've had some discussions with watershed areas. We spoke with Easton recently, and that's really concerning for them, where they have 70% watershed, where they have 4 reservoirs, where they provide 96% of the water that's used by Bridgeport. So, we have to recognize that no community is the same. And the way they've calculated fair share is really based on just the wealth of communities. It has nothing to do with your local resources or your existing infrastructure. So these are all truly concerning issues. So the 1,350 units, how would New Canaan go about building that? Well, we can get a developer to come in. We can get a developer to try to build for us. But of course, a developer is going to have a project pencil out for themselves. So, if we try to do it, let's say at 80% market value and 20% being our fair share, that would mean for New Canaan, which currently has 7,500 units, would need to build 6,749 units would have to be granted. That literally is an 89% increase in our entire housing stock in the town. So within 10 years, we would go from a 7,500 units of housing in our entire town to 10,000. And that's truly concerning. And then the next part is, well, if you don't want to have to build that many units, you could end up paying for it yourself. Okay, so if we tried to pay for it ourselves, you're then looking at a cost of roughly $650,000 a unit. And so that's well in the upper reaches, over 600 million for a town to pay for. And that's truly concerning, because if you're trying to reach those numbers and to fund this and to try to reach out, and the amount of time it takes to do it, the odds are that no town would be able to create that much housing that's needed and pay for that and organize all of the funding sources that would need to be made available to develop those numbers. So I guess that's all I have on that.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that you have, I think in like the town of Westport, for example, their town budget would go up 4 times under the fair share bill. And it doesn't really include, I don't think, the cost of building new schools, fire personnel, police personnel, and what have you. So very, very troubling. We do have a lot.
Sewer capacity as well.
Exactly, right.
It goes on and on. Those numbers have no calculation as to what the actual impact is. And I think the bigger problem is it's not just the cost, it's the buckling of the underlying financial stability of all of the communities and the property values. You have people that have striven to work hard to buy their houses, and the underlying value of their houses, everything that happens, their nest egg. And if you start doubling the communities, the property values go down dramatically, and these people will be at a loss. So it's not just the people, that are, stressed, who don't have housing. It's people who have houses are stressed to stay where they are, and this will be completely destroy their financial ability. And these are good people.
And I would also add that, remember, we're building high density market value housing. So high density housing. So it's apartments, right? And if you're trying to have a developer build it, it's very possible that it's just going to be rental units. So, it's not really getting building generational wealth. It's just and they disappear. So as Scott talked about how New Canaan is trying to build 100% affordable, those are not going to sunset. All of these bills include a lot of, I should say very limited affordability, but all of those affordable units end up sunsetting within 40 years. So it seems like a long time, but it's really not. And then you're just on this, constant cycle of trying to create more affordable when it all just sort of comes off your rolls. So.
Most of this housing would happen in what is the naturally occurring affordable housing. That naturally occurring affordable housing stock in all of these communities would disappear to fund this type of housing.
Right.
And the problem is, the ratios, I think, probably in fair share and in 8-30G, ensure that you have to build so much more market rate than you do affordable to make up for the loss of profit for developers for the affordable component. It has obviously the bad effect of out of scale, massive building up, building out, but also because you're adding much more non-affordable to affordable, it makes it even harder to attain that ratio over years. And New Canaan is an example of, they have a moratorium, which is a temporary suspension of 8-30G if you reach a certain amount, but you can go in and out of moratorium based on other development that's not affordable, or the component of the 8-30G, or maybe the fair share that's not affordable. That makes your ratio, whatever your ratio is that you're working with, go out of whack, and that counts against you. I don't see how this could ever end. And you have to look at the foundational assumption. Do we need all this? And when do we know when we have enough? And Francis Pickering was on one of our calls, and he is the director of WestCog. He pointed out that statewide, we have maybe 2,000 or 3,000 homeless people. And so the bulk of the, 120, 140,000 affordable units that is often cited as justification, those must be people that are burdened by paying more than 30% of their income on housing. But they're all living somewhere now. So you have to wonder about the foundational assumptions of this that justify all these laws.
Yeah, that's great. And we have several questions in the chats, and anybody is on the panel, feel free to jump in. I know Claudia from Westport, she wants, can we address the math problem of the 10% of 8-30G? It seems that,
what do you mean by address the?
I'm gonna finish. So the builder builds 100 units, 30 of which are affordable, but you've added 70 to the bottom line housing stock. So you actually need more affordable housing units. That's the 10% can never reach.
I can take that one easy. A bunch of years ago, I started to do a math calculation saying, every time you do that, you're increasing your numerator, the denominator doesn't go here. And finally, I went over to the high school and I said, hey, can I talk to a math professor or teacher? Yes. And I said, listen, here's my math. And it's this gigantic long sheet of paper saying, and I did it like this. And I said, can you create an equation for me that does this? He goes, yeah. A week later, he comes back over to my house and says, here's the equation. Let's plug it in. And so you plug in how much affordable you have, how much you're going to build. So in terms of Westport, let's say we have 10,000 units of housing, and we're at 2.7% at that point. For us to do it on an 80-30 basis, we would have to create 3,600 units of housing to get to that point, because each time you're increasing the numerator. So for us to get through 8-30G on the 80-30 basis would take 3,600 units of new housing. So that's the math on what 8-30G would do to a town to get to 10%.
And that ignores all other development in town that's not 8-30G. That's assuming nothing else gets built ever, right?
So that's what they would call fuzzy math.
And can I just add too, so part of our, when you take the link, when you take a look at the link that we have related to fair share, the second tab is 830G 10% calculation. And we've taken the time, the state provides every municipality's numbers, but they don't provide the percentage mix. And what we've been seeing a lot in these hearings is that some of the housing advocate legislators, or those pro housing, these bills, these onerous bills, say your town only has 3%, your town only has X. And when you look at, we've highlighted in green the towns that actually do have a total of 10%. And as was mentioned so well by Kathy, if you look, a lot of them, the first category is really the one that most towns can avail themselves of. That's when you're building it yourself. And that's sort of what we outlined with Fair Share It, as how expensive it is. And Scott's talked about how expensive that is to do. And even these towns that have 10% overall, because of there's 4 categories, a lot of them don't have 10% in that first category where they're building it themselves. So some have 2%, some have 6%, some have 5%, 4.5%. So, of the 29 towns as of this year, we've actually lost 2 towns that are no longer at 10% because of what we've just highlighted, that as soon as there's more market value building, you can run away from that 10% kind of target area. If you look at it, they don't even have it in that first column. The second column is rental assistance. So the rental assistance program done by the state. Well, the state allocates vouchers to the largest cities. So they have that. And some of them have 10% or close to it just in that category. The next one is CHAPA loans and USDA loans. You need to have farmland to qualify for a USDA loan. In CHAPA, there's set limits as to how much a loan can be in a community based on your zip code. And those numbers can mean that very few people can avail themselves of that within those towns. And then the final column is the deed restricted, where there's the 80-20. So if there's a developer with 80% and you have an inclusionary housing, that I believe that's what that deed restricted, that's the 4th criteria. So this is a rigged system, so you understand. So thinking that any town can easily accomplish this is it's hard to imagine. And so you can take a look at it for yourselves, take a look at your towns, and it's under the tab for 830G 10% calculation.
Great, thanks, Maria. A question, I think this will probably be more for Senator Fazio. On the bills, and is it possible that they can, what's the reality of them getting out of committee? Can you talk about that process? For some, it seems would be ridiculous that they could get out of committee, but we know also the makeup of the legislature right now. So maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, the reality is that they have a very good chance. The bad bills have a very good chance of getting out of committee. A couple of them got out of committee last year. I think the Fair Share Act, its iteration last year, did get out of committee. Maybe the Housing Authority bill did. They did not go to the floor. But the fact is that a lot of these leaders in the state legislature are explicitly in favor of some of these most onerous, most extreme bills. And there was an election, and they were vindicated in that election in many respects with very large majorities. And many of us in the election season were warning about exactly that threat, that if you have such a lopsided legislature in one way or the other, you're going to have negative and highly ideological outcomes. And this could be one of them. Now, I think that the best recourse has been what 169 Strong has been doing, and what many of you probably in the audience have been doing, which is sending messages to legislators, basically insisting that they do not pass some of these worst pieces of legislation through the committee. After the committee, the process essentially is that there's a negotiation between leaders and certainly in the majority, the leaders and their rank and file members, and there will be some members on their side of the aisle who do not want to have to vote one way or the other on these bills and would want them to die, but many of the leaders want these bills to pass into law. So this is very much up in the air. The influence of the general public on legislators who are very sensitive to political realities is important, and is probably the best recourse that exists currently, given the very large majorities in the legislature, to stopping some of these worst bills. I mean, I do want to see reforms that increase local control and also enable us to build in a way that has local buy-in. I went to the table this term and had 3 bills submitted with a Democratic state representative in order to reform 830G in a way that creates more local input and to make sure that the building that does occur is more discrete and less dense, potentially. That counts naturally occurring affordable housing and gives towns credit for those, and also then enables the state to encourage more of that discrete, naturally occurring affordable housing. That doesn't look like, say, the Weed Street proposal. That's 105 units in a single family neighborhood. So this is very much up in the air. They do have a very real chance. The public speaking out is the best recourse, best potentiality to stop it.
Great. And I do want to note, there are a lot of folks, I think, on both sides of the aisle that are speaking out against fair share. I do want to note that, we've seen Representative Steinberg from Westport. He said that he would filibuster fair share if it did get to the floor. I think Senator Marr, your colleague in the Senate, said something that she would be against fair share. So we are seeing, a lot of brave folks, speaking out against them. I just want to note that. And I think it is a result of the great work that, CT 169 Strong is doing with all of you. It's really, because of you guys in the audience. All right. Thank you for that. I have another question. Someone would like to know, can you define what affordability means when it comes to housing?
It's affordable. This is one of my own pet peeves. That affordable basically means whatever anybody wants it to mean. And so you get into workforce housing, you get into percentages of state median income, you have area median incomes. In general, the concept is that anyone who spends more than 30% of their income on housing costs is considered to be housing stressed. And of course, that puts a lot of people into one basket, and it eliminates the cause of choice. So I mean, if somebody spends 50% of their income, but they happen to be but they get into a very good school system and they prioritize having a bigger house over going on more vacations, are they housing stressed, or are they just choosing that they want to spend their money inside of their housing versus other uses of their money? But in general, inside of Connecticut, for something to be considered affordable housing, they gauge it off of state median income. So they take the median income of the entire state, and housing has to be deeded restricted to rental rate to people who make 80%, 60%, or 40% of the. And I don't know if there's a 20% also, but most of which is 80 and 60, which is very hard to make the numbers work on any way to make the development actually financially viable. And at 40%, you'd have to have really serious subsidies in order to make it remotely viable.
Another question about the Desegregate Connecticut bill. I think it's 6890. The transit-oriented communities live, work, ride. Now, Easton, for example, does not have a sewer. Is there an exemption in this bill for watershed towns? I know, and by the way, live, work, ride has not come up for a public hearing yet. That's coming up next week on the 15th.
I could add a little bit on that. So we are posting, we still have a couple of edits to make, but we do have that on our website, on ct169strong.org. It's Live, Work, Ride, and you can look up the concepts there. We encourage anybody who's interested to testify on Wednesday and to submit testimony. If you can't make it there, you could also just submit testimony. It's really important that we speak out on these bills. The concept of Live, Work, Ride is at this point appears to be an opt-in. So that is the good news. So there are other bills that are more onerous. It is an opt-in as a carrot. What they're offering is some funding. So I know there was a question asked about Bethel, where they might need the ability for a pedestrian walkway to build a certain housing complex because there's no way to get to where the actual station is. And that is an opportunity. However, the way the bill is crafted, I think you would have to provide, they're going to tell you how many units with this bureaucrat organization will tell you exactly how many units they would want from you to build. And so transit, it could be 20, is roughly 15 to 20 to 30 units per acre. And they will tell you how much of a size of lot sizes they want. So in terms, it could be a range from 50 acres that they would want you to classify or up to 200 acres was in one of the discussions for a larger city, a larger municipality. So I think it's tricky. I think you have to consider whether you want to opt, the towns still have the opt out. So that is the good thing about that bill.
Thanks, Maria.
I got a piece on that. It's not technically a full opt-in. It's an arm twist opt-in, because part of it is if you do not opt in, then state funds will not be coming to you in the future. So it's not like, yeah, you can do it if you want to. It's if you don't do it, there's also some punitive action that occurs. So, and that's when they gave their presentation to us, they didn't happen to mention that. And so our chair, asked, hey, isn't this the case? And it was like, yeah. And then we, continued to do that. So, when they do their dog and pony show, they're keeping some things behind the scenes that are just not as clear as it's supposed to be.
Yeah, thanks for
And
that.
as for watershed areas, no, they would build there as well.
Thank you. I have a question and another question, and I think we have at least one lawyer on this panel. I'm not sure if we have really an answer right now on this, but are these bills even constitutional? And I see one attorney right now.
Honestly, I don't know. Somebody would have to challenge the bill based on perhaps a constitutional principle known as takings. We see developers that sometimes raise those issues if you're sort of overkilling your zoning decision-making. I haven't, honestly, let me do some research. I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, we'll
But
take the
it
follow-up
certainly
on
should be
that one.
challenged.
Yeah.
It should be challenged on other things, so maybe not constitutional things, but it's not workable. It's a massive unfunded mandate. And frankly, it's harmful to the environment. I'm really surprised more environmental groups have not spoken out against these. These are development-oriented bills, all of them, starting with 8-30G and continuing on through even the work, live, ride. I know that there are exemptions. I'm trying to look it up right now. I'm working on an op-ed. There might be exemptions from it, but the problem is if you opt in, you give up your control to a department of the Office of Policy and Management to basically do your decision-making for you. So you might say, oh, I'll opt in because it sounds good. They'll help me build bus stops or something. But once you give up your control, they will determine what you can preserve and not. So they might, they might exempt some water company land, but you may feel like in the future with droughts and climate change and population pressures and water pressures that you need more land preserved. Well, who's going to make that decision? It won't be you. It'll probably be someone in Hartford. The same goes for habitat loss, natural flood control of open space areas. In the future, we need to be able to determine in our towns what works best. And when you give up control, no, you're not making that decision anymore. That's why the opt-in is dangerous. And if you don't opt in, as Matt said, there are sticks. They can withhold, I think 14 different state agencies have discretionary funding that normally would go to towns. That can be withheld from you when you more normally might have that. Some of that is brownfield remediation fund. So that's another environmental hit just in order to have this huge development pressure.
Quick thing on fair share in New Jersey, there are 10 municipalities that are suing the state over this. Now, whether it's on constitutional issues or not, I haven't read them fully, and I'm not a lawyer, thankfully, but it's still, you've got some municipalities that have said, we've had enough and we are getting together and we're suing the state. I wouldn't be surprised if that might happen here as well.
I would expect it to.
Scott, go ahead.
You look also that, just look at the practicality of this. There's going to be 169 plans for unique communities that go up to Hartford, that somebody in Hartford has to evaluate the unique situations of each of these towns and say whether or not this plan makes sense or doesn't make sense. And then they're going to dictate back to the town that, yes, you've come up with the appropriate plan or not, and then push out the punishments or keep the carrots from showing up. And then there's going to be a lot of lawsuits, and they're going to have to manage all of the lawsuits. So where's the $50 or $100 million that Hartford's going to go ahead and put into the expanding the housing commission or one of the housing groups that'll actually manage this group and fight all of the lawsuits and actually do a reasonable semblance of a good job of seeing if what they've asked us to do makes any sense? It just doesn't work.
And actually we're talking really about, we're kind of switching back and forth. Both fair share and the quote, work, live, ride, they both usurp local control and leave it to Hartford bureaucracies, but which are going to be populated with not me or you or green people. It's going to be people who are development advocates. So both of them take away any ability to make local decision making. It's quite dangerous.
We're coming towards the end of our panel tonight, or today rather. I do want to go back to fair share. Someone in the audience is asking, it's common knowledge that fair share has in fact failed in New Jersey. This is an idea that stems from New Jersey. Why would Connecticut continue to pursue a failed measure? Does anyone want to take that?
I would agree. So if this started in 1975 is roughly when this concept first came about, and it's the only state in the entire country that's adopted this, it seems like good ideas are emulated and bad ideas are just left where they are. And maybe that's the best solution here, is just to leave this idea where it is, and I think it's sort of, we should put a pin on the point that, we have some wonderful, terrific people who are the boots on the ground, who are the planning and zoning advocates, who are the true stewards of our land, in terms of making sure that it is managed properly, that we're not exhausting our natural resources, that we're building soundly in a consistent way. And all of these bills just seek to override all of that. And that's the real shame here, is that every year, and just looking at some of the testimony from yesterday, you can see the fatigue, you can see the frustration that we have these wonderful local experts who are up there testifying year after year. We have bills that are being retread, and it's the same concepts over and over. Instead of solving problems and moving on, the same bills get rehashed. And I think we need to find a better way that the legislators actually do work with us, because my fear, and part of my testimony from yesterday was, they're putting out these bills that sort of look like an opt-in, but they have either onerous provisions or they have a stick attached. And what's going to happen next year if they do get passed is they're going to say, look, we created this great opt-in opportunity, and look, these towns haven't taken us up on it, so they're acting in bad faith. So now we're going to give you real onerous bills and force the development that you're not doing because you're not coming to the table. And what we're suggesting is work with the people, work with those, on both sides of the aisle, who are the Danielle Dobbins of the world, who is a P&Z from Westport, or the Margarita Albin from Greenwich P&Z, people who are doing a really good job and are talking about all of these issues and the concerns. And I know is something, Scott, I've heard him say often, highly anticipatable consequences of these bad bills, and come up with something better in a partnership and not in an adversarial way. And that's all we've seen is adversarial legislation.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a great way to end this conversation. I know there are a lot of questions. CT 169 Strong is going to continue having these forums. Education is the best thing that we can do. And we also have to keep the pressure on our lawmakers. We have to remember lawmakers work for us, we the people, and we're best in a society when we're advocates for our communities and for ourselves. So go to our CT169strong.org page. There's lots of information there. You can donate there. We are we do require, we have hired a lobbyist to help us with our efforts in Hartford, because it has become a very onerous task, and that's the reality of it. So if you wish to donate, we would appreciate it. Any amount will be great. Thanks, guys. This is a terrific panel, great conversation for Saturday. I really, appreciate your time, appreciate the audience. We'll continue fighting. Thank you.